Hello, everyone. Welcome back to part 3 of the live reading of Alone on the Wall by Alex Honnold with David Roberts. I apologize. I missed 2 weeks in a row of this series. I have no idea why, nor do I have an excuse, really. I just kind of forgot that I was doing this. And then someone at the climbing gym was like, hey, what happened to the live reading? And I was like, oh no, what did happen to? So I long story short, my sincerest apologies. I apologize if you've not been able to sleep because I have not been reading to you. But here we're getting back into it. Without further ado, we left off on page 39. If you've missed the first 2 parts of this, I highly recommend going back and catching up. We're going to jump right into it. Today we're finishing chapter 2, A Very Private Hell. The regular northwest face route on Half Dome begins with a 510C finger crack. That happens to be one of my favorite pitches on the whole climb. The next 2 pitches are only 5.9 and 5.8. It was a good warm-up for the 2,000 feet of climbing above me. But then, on what's normally the 4th pitch, I ran into the first bolt ladder. There are 2 variations that bypass that blank section on either side. I'd climbed the first one, then the other, on my 2 roped free climbs of this route. On the left is a 2-pitched Higbee hedral, short for dihedral, I believe, rated Astern 512A, first freed by Art Higbee on his 1976 ascent with Jim Erickson. On the right is the Huber hedral, named after the German climber Alex Huber, full-on 511D. Hedral is slang for dihedral, a vertical inside corner on the rock. You see, I was 1 step ahead there. I'm too fast for him. I should shut my mouth, maybe. Thanks to Art and Alex for the handy alliteration of their last names. Even though the Huber variation is 1 grade easier, it's less secure. You have to traverse across a wall that's so smooth it's like polished glass. I thought about what it would take and then told myself, screw that, and chose the Higbee hedral instead. The Crux 512A sequence comes in a short boulder problem off a big, comfortable ledge. It made, I thought, for secure soloing, since if I couldn't connect the moves, I thought I could jump off and land on the ledge. That's horrifying, but okay. But those are some of the hardest moves on the whole route, and I had to shift my mentality from cruising up fun cracks to actually cranking on small holds. I laced my shoes up extra tight, then powered through the 6-move boulder problem without hesitating. The rest of the pitch was quite dirty. Half Dome is so much higher in altitude than the other walls in the valley that it has some of the feel of an alpine mountain. And with mountains, you get loose holds that you have to test before pulling on them. Pulling loose a single hold, obviously, can spell the difference between life and death when you're free soloing. You also get dirt and even vegetation in the cracks. Because the free variations are tackled so seldom, they don't get gardened by climbers the way the regular pitches do. It's a scary business to be on rock that ought to be reasonable to climb, only to have your fingers scraping through wet dirt or your toes jammed on clumps of moss or scrawny little shrubs. But I followed the faint trail of chalk marks that Brad and I had left 2 days earlier. So I was just thinking a little bit about that. So I shouldn't have started the sentence before, having a good thought about that. But free soloing and grabbing a handful of wet dirt is probably going to be my new nightmare. I'd never thought about that until just reading that right now, but that sounds horrifying. If I'm bouldering outdoors and a mantle has like loose dirt on the top, my heart jumps into my throat and I get extremely terrified. And, I'm on very small rocks. He's on much larger ones, so it just puts it into perspective. But I followed the faint trail of chalk marks that Brad and I had left 2 days earlier and managed to avoid most of the vegetation and dirt. As I rejoined the normal route, I relaxed and mentally shifted gears back into cruise mode. I had about 1,000 feet of climbing above me until I got to the next hard pitch. I wanted to go slow and steady so as not to get tired. A slow jog rather than a sprint. I had my iPod with headband earbuds so I could listen to tunes while I climbed. When the going got harder, I'd knock one earbud out. If it was really serious, both buds, so I wouldn't get distracted. The headband then would just dangle from my neck. That day I was cycling through some songs by Eminem, especially Lose Yourself. A very funny visual in my mind of Alex Honnold free soloing Half Dome and just mouthing along with Lose Yourself by Eminem. I don't know why, but I love that. And it might be my new favorite thing to think about. We'll see. The beautiful day was holding steady, but I had no time to look around and admire the scenery. Scenery is what you get to enjoy when you're belaying your partner on a conventional rope climb. When I'm free soloing, even on the easier pitches, I'm totally focused on what's in front of me. The universe shrinks down to me and the rock. You don't take a single hold for granted. You don't take a single hold for granite, I think is what it means. I'm not serious by the way. I had to take a brief pause there as my cat decided that she wanted to join in on this reading that we're doing and jump up on the desk. All right, where were we? The sheer magnitude of the wall came home to me as I climbed. I realized that this project was way more serious than Moonlight Buttress, even though both routes are rated 512. Pretty soon I was halfway up the route, 1,000 feet off the deck. Here the line, as first climbed in 1957, suddenly traverses to the right to access an enormous chimney system. The final section of blank rock before the chimney is normally tackled by a 50-foot bolt ladder. The previous time I'd free climbed the route, I circumvented the bolt ladder via a 512C pitch, using the bolts for protection but not aid. But now as I was approaching the ladder, I got cold feet about soloing it. The pitch is extremely insecure. Slopers and scoops, shallow indentations you can barely hold with flattened fingers, and which you have to smear with your feet, straining your ankles so that you can get as much friction as possible on the holds with the soles of your shoes. If I was going to free solo a route, it would be no smear November, I can tell you that right now. Footholds only, foot jugs, as a matter of fact, only stepping on ledges all the way up. Then those moves are followed by a down mantle, another thing that I would not be doing if I was free soloing. You would not catch me mantling anything. It's a tricky move, like lowering yourself off a table with your hands extended downward, palms gripping the edge of the ledge. Balance is everything, and it's hard to look down to see where you place your feet. And the feet have to find a narrow ridge of granite on which you step before you can let go of the mantle and move on. The free variation Higbee and Erickson worked out in 1976 breaks off to the left a pitch before the bolt ladder and circles around this whole section of the wall, rejoining the route another pitch above. I'd never climbed it, and I'd heard that it was loose and dirty, but suddenly adventurous 510 seemed a lot more fun than insecure 512C. The variation is a pretty devious line, as you climb a long 5'9" gully straight up, followed by a meandering 510B scuttle toward the right, after which you have to downclimb 100 feet of 510 to get into the chimney system. Add downclimbing to my list of no-nos for free solo. He's really ticking them all off for me. I broke off the normal route at a random point and started wandering upward, trying to find the 510 variation. But as I moved, I started to get confused about the line. The bushes I was climbing through gave me pause. There were no real signs of human presence here. No chalk marks from previous climbers, no fixed pitons, or even scars where they might have once been driven and removed. I started to worry that I was completely dropping the ball. I was literally in the center of Half Dome, 1,000 feet off the ground, possibly off route, on dirt. I said to myself, holy shit, this is hardcore. I love that. That's his first thought. He's like, dude, this is so punk rock right now. I hope I can find my way back. It wasn't true panic that I felt, just an uncomfortable anxiety. It would have helped a lot if I'd climbed this variation before, but I guess this is what I'd bargained for when I told Chris Widener I wanted to keep the challenge sporting. Fear. It's the most primal element in cutting-edge climbing, or indeed in adventure of any kind. Even non-climbers can recognize that fact when they watch the footage of me free soloing. That's why the first question out of their mouths is usually, aren't you afraid? They don't have to finish the sentence that you're going to die. I've done a lot of thinking about fear. For me, the crucial question is not how to climb without fear. That's impossible. But how to deal with it when it creeps into your nerve endings. Interviewed later by Sender Films, my Valley buddy Nick Martino claimed, Honnold's on another level than anyone else out there. It's like he doesn't feel fear or any of the normal emotions that anyone else feels. He has this ability to just shut his brain off and do the sickest climbs that have ever been done. Thanks, Nick, but that just isn't true. I feel fear just like the next guy. If there was an alligator nearby that was about to eat me, I'd feel pretty uncomfortable. In fact, the two worst doses of fear I've experienced in my life so far, both the result of heinous misadventures that sprang from seemingly minor mistakes, didn't come when I was free soloing. If I learned anything from those two screw-ups, it's never to take for granted even a casual outing in the backcountry. It was the day after Christmas, 2004. I was 19. My dad had died 5 months before, so I decided to hike up an easy peak that had been a favorite destination for both of us, Mount Talek near Lake Tahoe. It's all of 9,739 feet above sea level, but it rises a respectable 3,250 feet from its base. I'd climbed it a ton of times, but never in winter. We'd actually scattered some of Dad's ashes on the summit the previous summer, shortly after he died. In Dad's closet, I found an old pair of snowshoes. I'd never snowshoed before, never even done much of anything in the snow. As it turned out, they weren't very good snowshoes for this sort of outing. They didn't have crampons attached to the webbing, but I didn't know any better. As it also turns out, the snow had fallen about a month before, and it had been dry ever since. So the snow had turned to a hard, icy crust. I didn't want to take the slower, circuitous normal trail. Every reading, there's going to be one word that just breaks my brain. I apologize. I didn't want to take the slower, circuitous normal trail with its ups and downs, so I headed up one of the couloirs. All right, maybe two words, okay? Couloirs. I believe it's couloirs or couloirs. I don't know. Maybe it's French. I was tramping along, but the surface underfoot really sucked, and there was a crazy wind that day. I got most of the way up of the couloir before I said to myself, "This is bad." I tried to turn around to descend, and I just slipped. I remember sliding down the hill, whipping out of control. I went at least several hundred feet. I had time to think, oh my God, I'm going to die. I came to in the rocks. I'd been knocked out cold. Whether for mere seconds or for longer, I couldn't tell. I think I must have hit the rocks with my feet and then ragdolled over and crushed my face. I had a broken hand. I thought my leg was broken, but it turned out it was just badly bruised. I had punctured sinus cavity in my face and several chipped teeth. I'd been wearing gloves, but the thumbs had torn off. Must have been trying to self-arrest with my hands. The skin on my thumbs was like raw meat, as if they'd been sliced with a carrot peeler. Powerful and gross visuals. My mom had given me a cell phone for Christmas. I got it out and managed to call her. I don't remember this, but my mom later claimed my first words were, "Who am I? Where am I? What am I doing?" Always a scary first few questions to hear from your son. Mom called 911. The normal rescue helicopter couldn't get into where I'd fallen, so they brought in a California Highway Patrol helicopter. It took a while. Pretty soon I was lucid again. I could see lakes in the distance that I recognized, but I was still asking myself, why am I here? I must have been in shock. All the fear had occupied those few seconds of whipping down the icy slope, in the form of sheer terror and the conviction that I was about to die. But now I felt a deeper sort of dread. How badly am I hurt? Am I going to get out of here all right? There was an Indian family out snowshoeing who came along from below. 2 strapping 25-year-old lads and their parents. Sounds like the beginning of a bad porno. Sorry. They helped load me into the chopper. Within minutes, I was in an emergency room in Reno. It would take months for me to fully recover, especially because I kept climbing while my broken hand was healing. I still have scar tissue on my right thumb where the skin was scraped off. This is still the only real accident I've suffered, and what a complete debacle it was, thanks to my ignorance of snow and snowshoes. If this happened today, I'd be mortified, but I'd also self-assess and then hike out under my own steam. It's embarrassing to have to be rescued by helicopter. I don't think it's embarrassing to have to be rescued by helicopter, but to each their own, I guess. When I tell the story today, now that I've done so much serious climbing, the only way to treat it is as comedy. Maybe farce. I had started keeping my climbing Bible the previous month. That day, writing left-handed because I'd broken my right-handed, I recorded, "Talic, fell, broke hand, airlifted. Should have stayed more calm and walked off. Pussy." You can't maybe see it, but the word pussy is underlined. The most scared I've ever gotten while climbing came when I was 21, a couple of years after my snowshoe fiasco. I was with my second serious girlfriend, Mandy, short for Amanda. Finger, I barely know. I think her last name is Finger. I think that's what that's saying. It says Mandy and then in quotations, or in parentheses, short for Amanda, Finger. So Mandy Finger. She was a solid 5'13" climber I'd met at Jailhouse Rock, a sport climbing crag near Sonora. She was 5 or 6 years older than me, but we hit it off. We climbed together at Joshua Tree and Red Rocks near Las Vegas. We even talked about going to Europe. Anyway, on this particular day, we decided to climb a 3-pitch 512 route called the Nautilus in the Needles, a range of granite spires near the Kern River. The routes are trad climbs with the occasional bolt anchor. The Needles, as a whole, have a well-earned reputation for being intimidating. The Nautilus is actually on the east face of a formation called the Witch. It takes a long and tricky approach, winding between and around other towers, then scrambling up to the base just to get to the start of the route. I led the whole way. The first pitch is a classic 512B. I climbed it in style thinking, sweet. According to the topo, or route diagram, that I had with me, the next pitch was 11 plus, followed by a 510 finish. I didn't have any major trouble with the second pitch, but at the top I saw that the bolt anchors were way out in space, on the blank wall to the right, away from the crack system I'd climbed. It looked like a 511 traverse just to get to the anchors to clip in and belay. So I said, screw that, I'll just keep going. Combined the third pitch with the second in one long head. I had a 70-meter rope, so I figured it would reach. What I didn't know is that the last pitch was loaded with loose refrigerator-sized stones that you had to lie back past. Death blocks, as climbers call them, affectionately. We were in shade, it was cold, and by now I'd developed serious rope drag from all the bends in the rope, as it linked the pieces of pro I'd placed on the previous pitch. There was a lot of alliteration there. There I was, doing strenuous lie backing, trying not to dislodge any of the death blocks, and the rope drag was making it really hard to pull up any slack. On top of that, I couldn't get in any protection, as I'd used most of my rack on the third pitch. All I had left was a black Alien, the smallest cam anybody manufactures, a few nuts, and 3 carabiners. The climbing just felt too hard. No way it was 510. Later I found another topo that had the last pitch at an 11+. Basically, I was getting gripped, grasping the holds too hard out of fear and uncertainty. Mandy had been stuck in her belay way below me for about an hour. Now she yelled up encouraging comments like, "I'm cold, I'm scared, can we go down?" If I could have gotten in an anchor to rappel off, I probably would have gone down. Instead, I kept fighting my way upward. I placed no pro in the last 40 or 50 feet. If I came off there, I'd take a really long, bad fall, with all those big blocks to worry about pulling loose or cutting the rope. The dread was mounting. I was seriously scared. The last pitch ends in a little roof that caps the whole route. I got to just below the roof, but here the rock turns all licheny and dirty. The rope drag was horrible. There was a last mantle move to get over the roof, but I couldn't figure out which way to do it. At last I found a crack to get the black Alien in, and I just busted for the top. I did a really hard move, a full-on iron cross, crimping on tiny holds. It was so fucked. As I sat on top belaying Mandy, I had only 1 meter of rope left. I'd used the other 69 linking the last 2 pitches. As I could barely pull up on the rope, the drag was so bad. It's the most frightened I've ever been climbing. And it came not on a free solo, but on a conventional roped climb. All because of an impulsive decision to skip the bolt anchor and the ignorance of just how difficult the top pitch was. Today, I would have handled the whole thing better. I got more tools in my kit now. Maybe I could have downclimbed or placed less pro on the second pitch so I had more left for the finish. But as I sat there, emotionally exhausted, hauling the heavy rope that was tied to Mandy, I thought I was ready to give up climbing for good. Maybe I should go back to college, I said to myself, and finish my education. Of course, by the very next day, everything seemed different. I wasn't about to give up climbing. I'd just make sure to avoid getting stuck in cul-de-sacs like that last pitch on the Nautilus. Easier said than done. On September 6, 2008, 1,000 feet up the regular northwest face of Half Dome, as I pushed through dirty cracks and vegetation, wondering if I'd gotten off route on the Higbee-Erickson free variation, I sensed the threat of another cul-de-sac. I do want to say that I really like the way that this is formatted, how it keeps going back and forth in time and jumping back to him on the wall, and et cetera, et cetera. It keeps bringing us back to the moment of him on the wall with no rope, no protection, nothing like that, and then going back on his life and reflections. And because I'm sure this is, at least for me, it would be exactly how it would go. While doing something like this, I would totally be thinking about everything my entire life. He talks about how his head is clear and free, and he listens to music, but I just feel like I would be deep in thought, kind of like you are when you're driving, when you're in that kind of flow state. Let's see, where were we? My anxiety wasn't ratcheted up to the level of genuine fear, but it got my attention. So I focused hard, took a deep breath, and it sorted out my options. I told myself it wasn't a do-or-die situation. Climbing down is almost always harder than climbing up, but I still felt that I could have downclimbed the whole route so far, all 1,000 feet of it, if I had to. For that matter, if I got into truly nasty predicament, I could always sit and wait, even for a day or two, until some other climbers came along, asked to tie in with them, and finish the climb as their probably unwelcome guest. Imagine they just say no. They're like, "Nah, dude. Nah, you stay here. We'll call for help once we get to the top. Later." Hitchhiking, I call it. Other climbers in Yosemite have chosen that means of escape, or even have had to be rescued by helicopter, but I've never had to resort to either gambit, thank God, except for my ignominious chopper rescue on Mount Talek, but that wasn't climbing. Ignominious, sorry. On Half Dome, hitchhiking would really have sucked, and a helicopter rescue would have been even worse. As I later realized, I had climbed too high before traversing right. For all I know, on that traverse I was inventing a new variation to the Higby-Erickson free variation, charting new waters. Not what you would want to do free soloing, I don't think. The variation is supposed to end with a 100-foot downclimb of a 510 finger crack. I actually had to downclimb 150 feet. Eventually, though, I found some old nylon slings hanging from pitons, and that bolstered my confidence. But then I found it hard to get my fat fingers in the 510 crack. I could only lodge the first knuckle in a crack where other climbers, Lynn Hill, for example, could have sunk all 3 knuckles on each finger. So the downclimb felt distressingly thin, harder than 510, and the pitch took me a long time. In all, the variation cost me a ton of time, in actuality maybe 15 minutes, though it seemed an eternity. And a lot of stress, and I was relieved to finally get back onto the clean, well-traveled path. I put on my headband iPod again, and switched back into an autopilot mode for the next 500 feet of chimney climbing. Felt great to be in a clean, secure chimney. A pleasant routine of squirming my back, stemming my feet, palming, and repeating for hundreds of feet. I took it slow and steady, enjoying the climbing, and that brought me to Big Sandy, an enormous ledge system 1,600 feet on the wall. So far, I'd eaten none of my food and drunk none of my water. Big Sandy isn't the only place on the route where you can sit down, but it's such a spacious ledge, you could have a barbecue there with friends, if you could get them up there in the first place. I spent a few minutes taking off my shoes and relaxing. It had taken me about 2 hours of climbing to get here, and now I needed a breather. I ate my bars and drank the water, so I wouldn't have to carry the weight through the next hard pitches. Some climbers might have tossed the plastic flask once it was empty, but I've always believed in packing out your trash, so I stuck it back in my pocket. Soon enough, I retightened my shoes, set my iPod to repeat Eminem, and started climbing again. Lose yourself on repeat the entire time. He didn't write that. Those were my annotations. The day was getting warmer, even though I was still in shadow. At some point, I took off my shirt and wrapped it around my waist, cinching it with an over and under tuck of the sleeves. My short rest stop hadn't really felt like relief because I knew the hardest part of the climb was still above me. This final challenge hung over me, and the whole time I sat on Big Sandy, ramping up my concentration and intensity for the crux to come. Resting can be a double-edged sword. When you're free soloing, the pain in your feet and fatigue just seem to vanish. When you rest, those annoyances come back. You have to snap out of it and get serious again. So I think what he's saying is that when you're actually in the flow state that he establishes for himself when free soloing, he doesn't pay attention to those things or doesn't notice those things. But it seems like when he rests, they seem to come back. I think that's what he's saying. The next 3 pitches above Big Sandy are called the zigzags, presumably for the single zigzagging crack corner system they follow. Rated 511D, 510B, and 511C, they've always seemed harder to me. Maybe it's just because I happen to have huge fingers, but the thin crack set in a steep, polished corner has always felt more like 512. Aesthetically, the zigzags represent the best Yosemite has to offer. Perfect, clean corners with staggering exposure. But I wasn't thinking about the amazing view of the valley as I carefully lie-backed my way up the first tenuous pitch. I climbed almost in a daze. I knew what to do. I just tried not to think about it too much. I didn't think about the next hard pitches above. I didn't think about the 511 plus slab on top. That sounds horrifying, by the way, the 511 plus slab. A pitch above the zigzags. I just moved steadily between small finger locks up the steep dihedral. The crux of the first zigzag felt much easier than it had 2 days before, probably because now I had the sequence dialed. Every hold felt crisp and perfect, and I pulled really hard. The second pitch of the zigzags flew by in a frenzy of hand jams and hero lie backing. The climbing was secure enough that I could relax and enjoy it. With every zag of the crack, I found myself hand jamming over big protruding blocks, the base of the wall almost 2,000 feet below me, the valley floor itself 4,000 feet below. The pitch was a delight compared to the thin liebacks above and below. Hand jamming is another essential technique for the rock climber, and it's surprising that it took many decades to invent. If a vertical crack is between about 2 and 5 inches wide, but there are no edges inside it to grasp with the fingers, you can still use it for a hold by inserting the whole hand and flexing it to fit the crack, either by making a fist or by arching the back of the hand against the straightened fingers. Your hand acts like a wedge that you can put your whole weight on. Jamming is tough on the knuckles, and guys bent on a hard day of crack climbing will tape their hands to minimize the damage. I've never been into tape myself, though, mainly because my skin is so naturally resilient. I don't tend to suffer from the little cuts and scrapes that other climbers do. I stopped again for a minute below the last zigzag. I felt good, but wanted to be sure I didn't get pumped. On a rope, you're forced to rest at least 15 minutes per pitch while you belay, but when you solo, you never have to stop, so I force myself to pause at stances and relax, just to make sure I don't get ahead of myself. After a 2-minute breather, I set out up the undercling lieback feature, a slight variation on the original aid line. The undercling is somewhat pumpy, but only 511C, not terribly difficult compared to the original corner, which is supposedly 512 plus, though I've never tried it. The real crux of the variation is making blind gear placements in the flaring crack, but since I wasn't placing gear, I was doing the pitch the, quote, easy way. Still, it was another pitch of insecure liebacking, with both feet pasted against the smooth granite wall and flared jams for my fingers. Again, as on the whole rest of the route, the crux of the pitch was an extra thin section. I knew exactly what to do and hurried through it. The nearly 2,000 feet of climbing below me were beginning to take their toll. I was finding it harder and harder to give the climbing my complete attention. Part of me just wanted to get the climb over with. I feel like I would really feel like that when I was free soloing. I would just want to get to the top, just be done with it, you know? I don't know if that'd be good or bad. With the last zigzag below me, I was soon walking across Thank God Ledge, the amazing sliver of rock that traverses out from beneath the visor, only about 200 feet shy of the summit. I could hear noises from above and knew lots of people would be up top on this perfect late summer morning. The easy cable route up the other side of Half Dome is one of the more popular hikes in the valley, culminating in a 55-degree slab on which the National Park Service has installed a pair of metal cords to use like handrails. On a warm, sunny day like this one, there's a non-stop procession of hikers lined up on the cables like airport travelers in a taxi queue. I could hear the chatter of the tourists on top, but no heads peered over the ledge. I was glad no one was watching. I walked across Thank God Ledge as a matter of pride. I had walked its 35-foot length before, but I'd also crawled or hand-traversed it. It's less than a foot wide at its narrowest, but the wall above bulging ever so slightly at one point. But I didn't want to taint my solo ascent. I had to do this correctly. Incidentally, walking Thank God Ledge is another one of those things that's quite a bit easier with no harness, rope, gear, or pack hanging off you. The balance is more natural. The first few steps were completely normal, as if I was walking on a narrow sidewalk in the sky. But once it narrowed, I found myself inching along, facing out, with my body glued to the wall, shuffling my feet, and maintaining perfect posture. I could have looked down and seen my pack sitting at the base of the route, 1,800 feet below, but it would have pitched me head first off the wall. The ledge ends at a short squeeze chimney that guards the beginning of the final slab to the summit. I paused for a moment beneath the 90-foot slab, looked up to see if anyone was watching, still no one, and started up. The first few moves are easy enough, on somewhat positive holds with good feet. As you get higher, the holds disappear and the feet shrink. 2 days earlier, I'd considered 2 sections cruxy. The first involved a step through onto a miserly smear, while the second, 30 feet higher, involved a few moves of shitty hands and feet before reaching a jug, a big positive edge I could wrap my fingers around, that marked the end of the hard climbing, 60 feet up the pitch. I also knew that it was this slab that had thwarted Higbee and Erickson's attempt to climb the whole route free. So close to the summit, they'd had to use aid to surmount the last obstacle. Perhaps that should have given me pause. I hardly noticed the first crux. I cruised right through it, feeling pretty good about myself. 20 feet of thin cord hung from one of the bolts, and I briefly considered running the cord under my thumb, not weighting it, but having it there just in case. But that felt suspiciously like cheating. It's amazing to me that he will call himself on something like that. Just the thought of keeping his hand above the cord, not even grabbing it, but just keeping it there just in case he fell. And he still will call himself on that. It's very interesting. I climbed into the upper crux, feeling good about doing things legit, and then I ground to a halt. I'd expected to find some sort of different hold or sequence from the one I'd used 2 days earlier, which had felt pretty desperate, but perhaps I'd done it wrong. This time, in the same position on the same holds, I realized there were no better options. I had a moment of doubt, or maybe panic. It was hard to tell which. Although I'd freed the pitch maybe 2 other times the year before, I could remember nothing of the sequence or holds, perhaps because there aren't any. A gigantic old oval carabiner hung from a bolt about 2 inches above the pathetic ripple that was my right handhold. I alternated back and forth, chalking up my right hand and then my left, switching feet on marginal smears to shake out my calves. I couldn't make myself commit to the last terrible right foot smear I needed to snag the jug. I'd stalled out in perhaps the most precarious position of the whole route. I considered grabbing the beaner. With one pull, I'd be up and off. Tourists' oblivious laughter spilled over the lip. Tons of people were up top. I was in a very private hell. I stroked the beaner a few times. Say that 10 times fast in front of your friends. Fighting the urge to grab it, but also thinking about how foolish it would be to die on a slab, sliding and bouncing almost 2,000 feet to my death. There's a weed whacker going, by the way, in the background. I apologize if you can hear that. I can't quite tell if it's loud enough to hear, so we're just going to muscle through it. I almost started with I stroked the beaner a few times again. I hope I'll never have to say that again. My calves were slowly getting pumped. I knew I should do something soon since treading water was only wearing me out. Down climbing never occurred to me. I was going up. It was just a matter of how high, one way or another. But now, real fear seized me. Once again, I took a deep breath, studied the holds in front of me, and tried to think rationally about what I had to do. Although I never wanted to be on that slab in the first place, I had to finish what I'd started without invalidating my ascent. Finally, I compromised. I kept my hand on the pathetic ripple, but straightened my right index finger just enough for the tip of my last pad to rest on the bottom of the oval. My thought was, if my foot blew, I could snatch the beaner with one finger and check my fall. I smeared my foot, stood up, and grabbed the jug. No problem. I was delivered, free from my little prison, where I'd stood silently for a good 5 minutes, and I hadn't cheated by grabbing the beaner. I took the final 5-7 slab to the summit at a near run. 20 or more hikers sat at the edge of the precipice, witnessing my final charge, but no one said a word. No yells, no pictures, nothing. Maybe they thought I was a lost hiker. Maybe they couldn't conceive of where I'd come from, or maybe they just didn't give a shit. When I mantled onto the actual top, I was met with a flood of humanity. 100-odd people spread across the top of the summit plateau. Tourists ate lunch next to me. They made out, took scenic photos, people everywhere. Sounds like a great time. It was so weird, like parachuting out of Vietnam into a shopping mall. I was shirtless, pumped, panting, psyched out of my mind, flooded with conflicting emotions. I was embarrassed that I'd gotten scared on the slab, but I was thrilled beyond words to have finally done something that I've been thinking about for months. Ashamed of myself for maybe pushing it a little further than I'd planned, yet still proud of myself. On the summit, part of me wished that anyone had noticed that I'd just done something noteworthy, though maybe it was better that I didn't have to talk to anybody. How could I have expressed what my last few hours had been like? It was enough that I knew. I didn't make a sound. I took off my shoes and started hiking down the cable route. It was only then that someone noticed, "Oh my God," this dude blurted out. "You're hiking barefoot. You're so tough." Oh, if only you knew, my good friend. Despite ascending at a slow jog rather than a sprint, Alex completed the 2,000-foot climb, which spans 23 pitches for roped climbers, in the unthinkably short time of 2 hours and 50 minutes. 7 years later, no one else has seriously contemplated, let alone attempted, a free solo of the regular northwest face on Half Dome. Along with the outpouring of incredulous and wacky shout-outs on sites such as supertopo.com, there was praise of the highest order from the peers who could best appreciate the magnitude of Alex's free solo. John Long, one of the original Stone Masters, whom a younger Alex had regarded as a hero, commented, "There isn't anything else I can think of that requires that level of concentration for that length of time, with the penalty being certain death if you make the tiniest mistake." Sender Films got in touch with Alex, proposing to craft a 22-minute film about around reenactments of the Moonlight Buttress and Half Dome solos. Alone on the Wall would win prizes at mountain festivals all over North America and Europe, and turn Alex from a climbing prodigy into a minor celebrity. None of this, however, went to Alex's head. In the days after Half Dome, he reported, any huge sense of gratification eluded me. I felt like I had kind of botched the climb. I'd gotten away with something. It wasn't a perfect performance. In his climbing Bible, he jotted his usual laconic entry to document the trailblazing free solo, downgrading the route even as he recorded it. Regular Northwest face, 511D ? Solo, 2 hours 50 minutes en route. Higbee 510 bypass, sketchy on slab. Alex closed the note with a sad face emoticon and the query to himself, "Do better?" question mark. Well, there we learn a little bit more about Alex Honnold's psyche, and this brings to mind, we recently watched the Alexander Migos video from Patagonia. I can't pronounce it. It's the German word for red point. I think it's Rackpunkt, I think is how they pronounce it, but it was fantastic, and you got to see a little bit inside his mind about how perfection and anything shy of it is required. So he has to be perfect. So now that the weed whacker is getting a little bit close and people are for some reason doing their lawns at 3 o'clock on a Tuesday, I'm going to go ahead and wrap this up. I hope you guys have enjoyed, and I will see you next week for the beginning of Chapter 3. Thanks for watching.